Hook, midnight to 1 o'clock. There are two things Julian underestimated when he decided to marry a destitute girl, just to humiliate his elitist family. First, he thought she had no one. Second, he assumed her tattered clothes defined her net worth. But as the heavy oak doors of the cathedral swung open, and the global security detail stepped inside not to arrest her, but to bow to her, Julian realized a terrifying truth. He hadn't brought a lamb to the slaughter to shame his parents. He had dragged a sleeping dragon to his family altar, and he had just woken her up. Chapter 1, the setup. There are two things Ethan Blackwell underestimated when he decided to marry a destitute girl just to humiliate his elitist family. First, he thought she had no one. Second, he assumed her tattered clothes defined her net worth. But as the heavy oak doors of the cathedral swung open, and the global security detail stepped inside not to arrest her, but to bow to her, Ethan realized a terrifying truth. He hadn't brought a lamb to the slaughter to shame his parents. He had dragged a sleeping dragon to his family altar, and he had just woken her up. But wait, to understand how the billionaire heir of the Blackwell Empire fell to his knees in front of a girl he openly called a beggar, we have to go back to 48 hours before the disaster. Our emotional story begins in the busiest, loudest corner of the city. Sophia Carter stood behind the counter of a greasy diner, wiping down tables. Her hands were raw, and her feet ached from a 12-hour shift. To anyone walking in, Sophia was just another invisible face in a real-life story of survival. She wore an oversized, faded uniform and kept her eyes down. She always said, "If you stay invisible, no one can hurt you." But there was something the world didn't know about Sophia. There was a shocking truth hidden behind those tired eyes. Suddenly, the diner doors flew open. The bell above the door rang aggressively. In walked Ethan Blackwell. The air in the room instantly changed. Ethan didn't just walk into a room. He commanded it. He wore a custom-tailored Italian suit, a luxury watch that cost more than the diner itself, and an expression of pure, unfiltered arrogance. He was a man who used people like currency. Ethan had a massive problem, and he needed a quick solution. His traditional, aristocratic father, Richard Blackwell, and his cold, snobbish mother, Victoria, had given him an ultimatum. If Ethan didn't marry a woman of high society within 3 days, they would strip him of his multi-billion-dollar inheritance and give it to his sister, Isabella. But Ethan hated being controlled. He wanted to teach his elitist parents a lesson they would never forget. He didn't want a high-society bride. He wanted to find the most desperate, broke girl in the city, bring her to the family altar, and permanently stain the proud Blackwell name. He looked around the diner, and his eyes landed directly on Sophia. She was perfect for his twisted game. He walked up to the counter, tossed a thick stack of $100 bills onto the sticky surface, and looked at her with cold, mocking eyes. "I have a proposition for you, beggar," Ethan said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You're going to marry me in 48 hours. Sophia didn't blink. She looked at the money, then up at his arrogant face. Most girls would cry or act confused, but Sophia just stared. Underneath her calm exterior, an unexpected ending was already being set in motion. She knew exactly who Ethan Blackwell was. In fact, she knew his family's financial secrets better than he did. But she didn't pick up on his anger. Instead, she played her part perfectly. She lowered her head, making herself look small and frightened. "Why, me?" she whispered, forcing her voice to tremble. Ethan laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "Because my mother thinks she's royalty, and I want to see the look on her face when I force her to welcome a penniless, dirty waitress into our family tree. You are just a prop to humiliate my mother. You will wear the cheap, ugly dress I bought you, sign the marriage contract, and then you will disappear forever." This was his mistake. He thought he was the puppet master. He didn't know he was walking directly into a trap. Sophia looked down at the money again. To Ethan, she looked like a desperate girl giving up her dignity. But in reality, Sophia was thinking about how the Blackwell family conglomerate had spent the last 6 months trying to aggressively buy out her own family's hidden global estate. They had been ruthless, trying to crush smaller businesses. Now, the arrogant heir of that very family was handing her an invitation straight into their inner circle. "I'll do it," Sophia said softly, keeping her eyes on the floor. Ethan smirked, turning on his heel without saying another word. He didn't even ask for her last name. He didn't care. To him, she was an object, a tool for revenge against his parents. That evening, Ethan met his sister, Isabella, and his mother, Victoria, at an upscale restaurant. He leaned back in his chair, a smug smile on his face. "I found my bride," Ethan announced casually. Victoria adjusted her diamond necklace, her eyes narrowing. "Is she from a Vanguard family or the Miller Dynasty?" Ethan's smile widened. "She cleans tables at a third-rate diner. She smells like grease, and her clothes have holes in them." Isabella gasped, dropping her fork. Victoria's face turned completely pale, her aristocratic composure shattering in an instant. "You wouldn't dare," his mother hissed. "You will ruin our family reputation." "The wedding invitations are already sent," Ethan replied coldly. He felt powerful. He felt like he had won the ultimate game of chess against his family. He couldn't wait for the wedding day to see his mother crawl in shame. But wait, it gets worse. While Ethan was celebrating his petty victory, Sophia was sitting in a dim room, far away from the diner. She pulled a secure, encrypted smartphone out of her faded bag. She dialed a number. The call was answered on the first ring. A deep, highly disciplined voice spoke on the other end. "My lady, we have been tracking your location. The board members are panicking. Where are you?" Sophia looked out the window, her submissive diner persona completely gone. Her eyes were now icy, sharp, and intensely calculated. "Prepare my personal security detail," Sophia commanded calmly. "And tell the legal team to prepare a full audit and foreclosure notice for the Blackwell conglomerate. I'm getting married in 2 days." There was a long pause on the line. "Should we stop the wedding, my lady?" Sophia smiled a cold, dangerous smile. "No. Let Ethan think he's running the show. Let him build his stage. Because what happens on that altar, no one saw coming." But everything was about to change. Chapter 2, The Tension. The countdown to the disaster had officially begun, and Ethan Blackwell was completely blind to the trap closing around him. To him, the next 48 hours were nothing more than a thrilling game. He spent his time laughing with his wealthy friends at exclusive elite clubs, bragging about how he was going to permanently break his mother's pride. He even showed them a picture he had taken of the diner where Sophia worked. "Look at this place," Ethan mocked, tossing his phone onto the velvet table. "Asterisk, she survives on tips. My mother is going to need medical attention when she walks down that aisle." Asterisk. His friends laughed, raising their expensive crystal glasses. But wait, here's the shocking part. While Ethan was laughing, his father, Richard Blackwell, was pacing frantically inside the Blackwell State Library. The air in the mansion was thick with panic. Richard's phone kept ringing, one urgent call after another. Asterisk, what do you mean our credit lines are frozen? Asterisk, Richard roared into the receiver, sweat beads forming on his bald forehead. Asterisk, we are the Blackwells. We own half the commercial real estate in this city. Asterisk, the voice on the other end was trembling. Asterisk, sir, a mysterious institutional investor just quietly bought up 80% of our secondary debt. They didn't just buy it. They are demanding an immediate full liquidity audit. If we cannot prove we have the cash reserves by Friday morning, they have the legal right to seize our foundational assets. Even this mansion, sir. Asterisk. Richard slammed the phone down, his chest heaving. He didn't know who this shadow investor was. He had no idea that the global conglomerate pulling the strings was headed by a reclusive family that rarely showed their faces in public, the Carter Dynasty. And he certainly didn't know that the sole heiress to that dynasty was currently sitting in a cheap apartment, quietly sewing a hidden emblem into the lining of a wedding veil. The phone rang again. It was Victoria, his wife. Asterisk, Richard, you need to beat some sense into your son. He is insisting on bringing that filthy peasant girl to cathedral. The media is already asking questions. Asterisk, quiet, Victoria. Asterisk, Richard snapped, his voice cracking under the psychological pressure. Asterisk, I don't care about Ethan's petty rebellious games right now. We are facing a financial execution. If we don't find out who is squeezing our throat, we won't even have a name left to protect. Asterisk, Meanwhile, Ethan was keeping the emotional pressure high on Sophia. He didn't want her looking too presentable. He wanted maximum humiliation. He sent his personal driver to deliver a box to her small apartment. Inside was a cheap, poorly fitting, off-the-rack wedding dress from a clearance outlet. Attached to the dress was a cold, typed note, * wear this. Do not wash your hair. Look exactly like what you are. A charity case. * Sophia's personal assistant, who was secretly standing in the small room disguised as a landlord, reached out to grab the dress in anger. * This is an insult, my lady. Let me call the security division. We can crush Ethan Blackwell with a single press release before the sun sets. * Sophia reached out and gently touched her assistant's arm. Her face was perfectly calm, like a calm ocean before a massive Category 5 storm. Let him play his game, Sophia said softly, a faint, chilling smile appearing on her lips. * The higher Ethan stands on his pedestal of arrogance, the harder his bones will shatter when he falls. This dress is perfect. It ensures his family looks down on me until the very last second. But she didn't pick up on his anger. Instead, she took the cheap dress and hung it up next to a pristine white custom silk veil that arrived in a locked briefcase an hour later. A veil embroidered with the golden crest of the Carter Dynasty. That night, the phone on Ethan's nightstand vibrated. It was an unknown number. He picked it up, expecting another angry lecture from his mother. Ethan, a calm, deep voice said. It wasn't his mother. It was an older man, speaking with authority that made Ethan's posture instantly straighten. You are playing with fire. Cancel this wedding. Marry someone from your own circle, or you will lose everything. Ethan scoffed, his arrogance taking over. Who is this? One of my father's old business partners? Let me tell you something. No one tells me what to do. My family needs to learn that their money can't buy my obedience. The wedding is happening, and that beggar girl is entering the cathedral. The voice sighed, a sound filled with pity. You think you are using her to punish your parents, but you have no idea who is actually holding the leash, Ethan. The line went dead. Ethan stared at his phone, a brief flash of irritation crossing his mind, but he quickly dismissed it. He was too consumed by his desire to see his mother crawl. That was his ultimate mistake. The morning of the wedding arrived. The city was buzzing with rumors. The Blackwell family had tried to keep the guest list small to hide the shame, but Ethan had secretly leaked the details to the paparazzi. He wanted the whole world to witness his family's ultimate social downfall. As Sophia sat in the back of an ordinary taxi driving toward the Grand Cathedral, she looked down at her hands. They were bare. No jewelry. No diamonds. She wore the cheap, poorly fitting dress. To any regular person, she looked like a victim being dragged into a real-life story of elite cruelty. But beneath that cheap dress, her heart beat with steady, rhythmic coldness. She reached into her pocket and looked at her phone one last time. A text message from her chief legal counsel read, all assets positioned. The Blackwell debt trap is fully loaded. Awaiting your signal at the altar, *. Sophia deleted the message, looked out the window at the towering spires of the Blackwell Cathedral, and whispered to herself, let the show begin. That was the moment everything started falling apart. Chapter 3. The Partial Reveal. The Blackwell Cathedral was a masterpiece of old-world architecture, filled with towering stained-glass windows and massive oak doors. Today, however, it felt less like a house of worship and more like a high-tension battlefield. Julian's family, the Blackwells, sat on the right side of the aisle. Victoria Blackwell sat rigidly, her face frozen in a look of absolute disgust. She wore a black lace dress, looking as if she were attending a funeral rather than her son's wedding. Next to her, Richard Blackwell was pale, his eyes darting toward the entrance, his mind still consumed by the sudden collapse of their family's credit lines. Isabella, Ethan's sister, was whispering maliciously to her high society friends, pointing at the empty left side of the church. The bride's side was completely empty. Not a single soul sat there. Look at that, Isabella whispered loudly enough for front rows to hear. The trash doesn't even have a family to bring. I bet she paid a taxi driver just to drop her off at the gate. Asterisk. Ethan stood at the altar, looking incredibly sharp in his custom tuxedo. He heard his sister's comments, and his lips curled into a satisfied smirk. Everything was going exactly according to his plan. His family was humiliated. The atmosphere was thick with resentment, and he was about to prove he was the one in control. The heavy, traditional wedding music began to echo through the massive cathedral. The heavy oak doors slowly creaked open. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Sophia Carter walked down the aisle. She walked entirely alone. She wore the cheap, off-the-rack dress Ethan had bought her. It was slightly loose around her waist, and the fabric looked dull beneath the brilliant crystal chandeliers. The high society guests began to snicker and cover their mouths with their silk handkerchiefs. Asterisk, is this a joke? Asterisk, Victoria hissed under her breath, clutching her diamond necklace so tightly her knuckles turned white. Asterisk, she looks like she walked out of a soup kitchen. Asterisk, but wait, look closer. As Sophia walked closer to the altar, the snickering in the back rows began to die down. A strange, heavy silence started filling the room. Why? Because of how she walked. Sophia didn't look like a poor girl trembling in fear before billionaires. Her head was held high. Her posture was perfectly straight, radiating an effortless grace that money simply could not buy. She didn't look at the mocking faces in the crowd. She looked directly ahead, her eyes icy, focused, and completely devoid of fear. Ethan watched her approach, and for a split second, a strange knot formed in his stomach. The submissive, frightened waitress from the diner was nowhere to be found. The girl walking toward him carried herself like a queen walking through her own palace. He forced a smirk onto his face, trying to shake off the sudden wave of unease. "Don't forget your place," he muttered under his breath as she stepped up to the altar beside him. Sophia didn't answer. She didn't even look at him. She simply stood by his side, her eyes fixed on the priest. The ceremony began. The priest spoke about holy matrimony, his voice echoing in the vast space, but no one was truly listening. The tension in the room was a living, breathing thing. Suddenly, a disturbance came from the back of the cathedral. The heavy oak doors didn't just open this time. They were aggressively pushed back until they slammed against the stone walls. The loud bang echoed like a gunshot through the church. The priest stopped speaking mid-sentence. Ethan frowned, turning his head sharply toward the entrance. 3 men in dark, identical tailored suits stepped inside. They didn't look like regular wedding guests. They moved with absolute military precision. The man leading them was older, carrying a sleek, matte black briefcase. Richard Blackwell's eyes went wide. His jaw literally dropped. He recognized that older man. It was Marcus Vance, the chief legal executioner for the Carter Dynasty, a man who only appeared in public when a multi-billion-dollar corporate empire was about to be dismantled. Richard frantically gripped his son's arm from the front pew. "Ethan," Richard whispered, his voice trembling with a terror his son had never heard before. Asterisk. "Ethan, what did you do? Who did you bring to this altar?" Asterisk. Ethan looked from his terrified father to the 3 men walking down the aisle, his arrogant composure finally beginning to crack. Asterisk. "Dad, relax. She's just a waitress from a diner. She has nobody." Asterisk. Marcus Vance walked directly past the Blackwell family, ignoring them completely. He stopped right behind Sophia. He didn't look at the priest. He didn't look at the groom. Instead, he bowed deeply, a full 90-degree bow of absolute reverence, directly to the girl in the cheap clearance dress. "My lady," Marcus Vance's voice echoed clearly through the silent cathedral microphone. Asterisk, the final assets have been secured. The Blackwell Empire is officially cornered. We are ready for your final command. Asterisk. Ethan stared at Sophia, his breath caught in his throat. He saw something in her eyes that he had completely missed in the diner. He saw absolute power, and then silence. But that wasn't even the worst part. Chapter 4, The Escalation. The whisper of Marcus Vance echoed to the stone vaults of the cathedral, like a physical blow. The high society guests stopped whispering. The snickering turned into a suffocating, frozen dread. Victoria Blackwell sat frozen, her hand still gripping her diamond necklace, but her eyes were darting from the cheap, off-the-rack wedding dress to the 3 suited figures who stood behind Sophia, like statues of doom. Ethan, Victoria's voice cracked, dropping her aristocratic composure entirely. Asterisk, Ethan, what is the meaning of this? Why is Marcus Vance bowing to this girl? Asterisk, Ethan didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat felt completely dry, and his heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped animal. He looked at Sophia, really looked at her, for the past 48 hours. He had viewed her as an object, a prop to throw in his mother's face. He had assumed her silence was fear. He had assumed her lowered head was submission. But here's where everything changed. Sophia slowly turned her head to look at him. She didn't look down at the floor anymore. She looked directly into his eyes, and the sheer, unadulterated coldness in her gaze made Ethan step back a full foot. The submissive diner waitress was completely gone. In her place stood someone whose presence filled the entire room. "You look pale, Ethan," Sophia said, her voice conversational, light, and terrifyingly calm. Asterisk, is something wrong with your custom suit? Asterisk, who are you? Asterisk, Ethan stammered, his arrogance completely evaporating. Asterisk, you're a waitress. I checked the diner. You work there. I have your employment records. Asterisk. Sophia let out a soft, melodic laugh that sent a shiver down his spine. Asterisk, I do work there, Ethan. My family owns the parent corporation that owns the land that diner sits on. We also own the global logistics firm that ships the food to that diner. Sometimes, when the corporate boardroom gets too loud, I like to sit in the quietest corner of my empire to watch how regular people behave. And then you walked in. Asterisk. Richard Blackwell scrambled out of the front pew, pushing past his daughter Isabella, and stumbled toward the altar. His face was entirely devoid of color. My lady, Richard gasped, his knees shaking. Asterisk. You are the reclusive daughter of the Carter Dynasty? The one who controls the Global Asset Management Fund. Asterisk. Marcus Vance stepped forward, his expression cold and professional. Asterisk, Mr. Blackwell. You are speaking to Sophia Carter, sole executor of the Carter Heritage Estate, and as of exactly 9 minutes ago, she is also your primary creditor. Asterisk. The room erupted into a wave of panic muttering. Isabella Blackwell's jaw dropped, her phone slipping from her fingers and cracking loudly on the marble floor. The high society friend she had been laughing with seconds ago quietly began moving away from her, as if poverty were a contagious disease. Richard grabbed a wooden altar rail to keep from collapsing. Asterisk. No, that's impossible. We are the Blackwells. We have an unshakable market position. Our debt is structured over 30 years. Asterisk. It was... Marcus Vance replied, snapping his matte black briefcase open with a crisp metal click. He pulled out a thick stack of legal documents stamped with a red corporate seal. Asterisk. But your secondary lenders panicked when our firm quietly initiated a liquidity stress test on your commercial holdings yesterday morning. To save themselves, they sold your debt notes to us at a 20% discount, under Clause 4 of your foundational charter. If your family name faces a significant public scandal that threatens the stability of the stock, the primary creditor has the right to demand immediate repayment of the full balance. Asterisk. Marcus looked up, a ruthless smile playing on his lips. Asterisk. And bringing a camera crew and the paparazzi to a sacred cathedral to publicly humiliate a girl you thought was a beggar. I believe that qualifies as a significant public scandal, Mr. Blackwell. Asterisk. Ethan looked at his father, his mind spinning. Asterisk, Dad? What is he talking about? Tell him we can just pay them. We have billions. Asterisk, we don't have it. Asterisk, Richard screamed, turning on his own son with a look of pure rage. Asterisk, our billions are tied up in real estate and speculative tech. If they call the debt today, we have to liquidate everything. We are wiped out. Ethan, completely wiped out. Asterisk. The emotional wave in the cathedral went from heavy tension to absolute shock. Ethan looked back at Sophia, his hands trembling. He realized the terrifying scale of his mistake. He had wanted to stain his family name to prove a point. Instead, he had handed the knife to a girl who was about to cut their throats. But Sophia just stood there, her hands folded neatly over her cheap dress, watching the Blackwell family unravel before her eyes. The priest had backed away into the shadows of the altar, holding his Bible like a shield. "Sophia! Please," Ethan whispered, taking a desperate step toward her, his voice cracking with humiliation. Asterisk, we had a contract. We had an agreement. I can make this right. Asterisk. Sophia tilted her head, her eyes flashing with dangerous amusement. Asterisk, an agreement? You told me I was a prop, Ethan. You told me to wear a dirty dress, not to wash my hair, and to disappear the moment the papers were signed. You wanted to use my life to play a petty game with your mother. Asterisk. She stepped closer to him, her voice dropping to a whisper that only he could hear. Asterisk. What happened next? No one was prepared for. Chapter 5. The Escalation. The air inside the cathedral grew colder, the silence so absolute that the rhythmic, frantic breathing of Ethan Blackwell was audible to the first 3 rows. Victoria Blackwell finally stood up from her seat, her legs shaking beneath her designer lace dress. She walked toward the altar, her face a mass of pride, trying desperately to hide absolute terror. "Miss Carter," Victoria said, forcing her voice into a diplomatic upper-class tone. Asterisk, my son, he is reckless. He wanted to make a point to us. But we are people of status. We understand how the world works. This misunderstanding doesn't need to destroy 2 great names. We can proceed with the wedding. We can merge our interests. A Blackwell and a Carter. We would control the entire market. Asterisk. Sophia turned her icy gaze toward Victoria. The older woman visibly flinched under the pressure of that look. Asterisk. A misunderstanding, Mrs. Blackwell? Asterisk, Sophia asked, her voice carrying across the entire church. Asterisk. Yesterday, your daughter Isabella called my apartment manager and offered him $5,000 to film me cleaning the toilets, just so she could post it online during reception. Your husband, Richard, spent his morning signing an executive order to demolish 3 low-income housing blocks downtown just to build a luxury parking garage, leaving 40 families homeless by winter. Asterisk. Sophia took a step toward Victoria, her posture radiating an ancient, unyielding authority. Asterisk. You don't want to merge families with me. Victoria. You want to save your diamonds. But you see, that call you ignored 6 months ago from an anonymous investor offering to restructure your debts without losing your pride? That was me. That was your last chance. Asterisk. Victoria's eyes went wide. She remembered the call. She had told her secretary to tell the caller to asterisk, go back to the slums where they belong. Asterisk, her face turned an ash-gray color. Ethan fell back against the altar table, his hands gripping the wood. The reality of his absolute ruin was setting in. He had thought he was the ultimate rebel, the smart player who was punishing his elitist parents. In reality, he was just a small, arrogant child who walked straight into a trap designed by a master. Sophia, Ethan begged, his eyes filling with tears of pure shame. Asterisk, please. Don't do this to my family. I'll do whatever you want. I'll publicly apologize. I'll tell the media it was all my fault. Asterisk. It is your fault, Ethan, Sophia said softly. She reached up and slowly unpinned the cheap, simple veil from her hair. She tossed it onto the stone floor at his feet. Asterisk. You wanted to marry a poor girl to shame your family. You wanted the world to see how low you could stoop. Well, look around you. Asterisk. She signaled to Marcus Vance. The legal executioner stepped forward, pulling a gold-plated pen from his pocket and handing it to Richard Blackwell, along with a single, red-bordered document. Asterisk, what is this? Asterisk, Richard whispered, his hand shaking so violently he could barely hold the pen. A voluntary asset transfer, Marcus Vance stated coldly. Asterisk, you sign over the controlling shares of the Blackwell Group to the Carter Heritage Estate right now, at the altar in front of your high society peers. If you sign, we waive the personal bankruptcy penalties. You keep your personal savings, and you keep your clothes. If you do not sign, we file the foreclosure in federal court in exactly 2 minutes, and the police will escort you out of your mansion by noon. Asterisk, Richard looked at his wife, then at his arrogant son who had caused this entire nightmare. With a heavy, broken sob, the proud billionaire dropped to his knees on the altar step, using the holy table as a desk, and signed his name across the line. The high society guests began to quickly slip out of the back doors, desperate to leave before the press arrived to photograph the complete liquidation of the Blackwell family. Isabella was crying openly in her seat, covering her face with her hands. Sophia looked down at Ethan, who was staring at his father on his knees. The unexpected ending was fully realized. The power dynamic had completely inverted. The girl from the grease-stained diner was walking away with their entire world. What happened next? No one was prepared for. Chapter 6 and the ending. The heavy oak doors of the cathedral slammed shut a final time as the last of the high society guests fled into the afternoon streets. Inside, the grand church felt completely hollow. The brilliant crystal chandeliers cast long, mocking shadows across the empty pews. On the altar floor lay the cheap clearance veil, tossed aside like a piece of worthless garbage. Ethan Blackwell remained frozen where he stood, his gaze fixed on the spot where his father, Richard, was still on his knees, clutching the gold-plated pen. Victoria Blackwell had sunk back into the front pew, staring blankly ahead, her manicured hands trembling uselessly in her lap. The proud Blackwell empire, built over generations on a foundation of ruthless arrogance and high society elitism, had been dismantled in less than 30 minutes. And it had all happened because Ethan wanted to play a cruel game with an invisible girl from a grease-stained diner. Sophia Carter did not look back. She walked down the long wedding aisle with the same steady, effortless grace she had displayed when she first entered. Marcus Vance and the 2 personal security guards followed closely behind her, their footsteps echoing in a slow, rhythmic cadence against the marble floor. As she stepped through the exit, the brilliant afternoon sun hit her face. A fleet of sleek black luxury SUVs with tinted windows stood waiting at the curb, their engines humming in unison. A crowd of paparazzi and investigative journalists pressed against the metal security barriers, their cameras flashing frantically. They had expected to photograph a high society scandal involving a billionaire's rebellious son and a penniless waitress. Instead, they were witnessing the public emergence of the city's most powerful, reclusive heiress. Marcus Vance stepped ahead, opening the heavy door of the lead vehicle for her. Before stepping inside, Sophia paused. She looked at the towering spires of the cathedral, then down at her cheap, loose wedding dress. A quiet, calm emotional wave washed over her. For months, she had lived among regular people, watching how the wealthy use their power like a weapon to crush those beneath them. Today, she had proven that true power doesn't need to shout, and it certainly doesn't need a designer label to be felt. She slid into the leather interior of the vehicle, and the door closed with solid, quiet thud, shutting out the chaotic noise of the world outside. The fleet pulled away from the curb smoothly, disappearing into the city traffic, leaving the broken Blackwell family to pick up the pieces of their ruined lives. By the next morning, the real-life story of the altar execution had spread across every financial network and media outlet in the country. The Blackwell Group stock had plummeted to zero before the market even opened, its remaining assets quietly absorbed into a massive portfolio of the Carter Heritage Estate. Ethan Blackwell's name became a permanent warning in elite circles, a shocking truth about what happens when arrogance blinds a man to his own limitations. Ethan was forced to take a low-wage job at a shipping warehouse on the docks just to help his parents pay the rent on a small, cramped apartment on the outskirts of the city. Every single day, as his hands grew raw from lifting heavy crates, he would look down at his worn-out clothes and remember the quiet girl from the diner. He had wanted to teach his family a lesson about humility. Instead, life had taught him a lesson he would never, ever forget. Sometimes, one single moment changes everything. We look at the world around us and judge people by the clothes they wear, the jobs they work, or the status they hold. But real life has a strange way of balancing the scales when people least expect it. True value isn't found in a billionaire's bank account or an elite family name. It is found in how you treat people when you think no one is watching. The Blackwells built their house on a foundation of pride and cruelty, and when the storm finally arrived, they realized too late that their wealth was nothing more than an illusion. But the lesson stayed, and it was written in stone at the altar. End arrow, the final ending. Arrogance always demands a price, and life always collects its debts. Ethan Blackwell thought he was using a helpless girl to destroy his family's pride, but his own cruelty became the very trap that snapped his life in half. He wanted a submissive prop, but he accidentally invited a queen to execute his empire. What would you have done if you were in Sophia's shoes? Would you have taken everything from his family, or would you have walked away sooner? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.